Okay, welcome back. Next, we are going to hear from Dr. Hani Kushlaf, who is an associate professor of neurology and pathology at the University of Cincinnati. He is a director of research in the Neuromuscular division, the director of the MDA Care Center, and the director of the Neuromuscular Medicine Fellowship Program in the Department of Neurology and Rehabilitation Medicine at the University of Cincinnati in Ohio. So Dr. Kushlaf, I will turn it over to you and welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Nicole. Let me just, it's going to take me a second here to share my screen. Okay.
Perfect. That's great.
All right. Thank you, Nicole, for the nice introduction, and also thanks to the MDA for sponsoring and organizing this Engage seminar, and thank you for attending. I'm going to talk to you today about research and clinical trial review and updates. My objectives is to highlight the recent advancement in neuromuscular disease research over the past year, and what these advancements have in terms of implications on treatments and clinical care. And then we go over overview of clinical trials that are ongoing and enrolling, including the timing and objectives of these trials. I will tell you before I start that what's going on in neuromuscular diseases under the muscular dystrophy umbrella is extensive over the last year. And I don't think I'll be able to go over everything. I'm hoping that I would be touching on the high points that have clear-cut relevance to patient care. So I thought I would start first by introducing you to what's research, because of course MDA families may have not participated in research before and would like to understand what research is. So the best definition I could find for what is research is that it's a systematic investigation. It is designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. It is basically, the goal of it is to, for us to know new things about things that we didn't know. So to gain new knowledge about something. The forms of research are extensive. One of them, for example, is an observational study. You take a group of muscular dystrophy patients and you follow them longitudinally for a certain outcome. But what's most important to me is a clinical trial, because that is what's going to introduce new treatments for patients. So what are clinical trials? So clinical trials are research studies that are conducted to determine whether a medical strategy, a treatment, or device is safe and effective for use in human beings. These trials use either novel drugs or treatments, and so these drugs typically sometimes are tested in human beings for the first time. They're different. Clinical trials are different from routine medical care because we really do not know what the effect is going to be on patients, and that's why we are studying them. Clinical trials go through phases, starting with preclinical phase, where sometimes animal models are used to study the effects of medications, and then it goes to phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and following phase 3, typically there is submission for FDA approval, and if there is an FDA approval, most of the time there is post-marketing approval study, which is a phase 4. So looking at that more closely, phase 1, typically it's done on healthy volunteers with the disease or condition. It can last for several months. The purpose typically is defining the safety and the dosage to use in that specific medication. 70% of the drugs may go to the next phase. Phase 2 is using typically the number of study participants is higher, and it is those patients now who have the condition that we're trying to see if the treatment works for or not. The length of it can range from several months to 2 years. The purpose of the phase 2 trials is basically defining if there is any signal of efficacy, and also looking again at the safety of the medication. 33% of the drugs may go to the next phase, and that's a phase 3 trial. Phase 3 trial, typically it's the pivotal trial that will lead to drug approval. Typically, larger number of patients are included in that trial, and the length of it can vary from 1 to 4 years, and sometimes even shorter. The purpose of it is looking really at the efficacy, and also, again, looking at how safe the medication is in a larger number of trial participants. And if it leads to drug approval, then of course, the patients who are on that medication, they're still going to be monitored for safety and efficacy. The most common design that's used in phase 3 trials is a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled. So patients first are assessed for eligibility for the trial based on specific criteria, and then they're randomized either to the treatment arm, where patients will receive the experimental treatment, or to the placebo arm, where they will receive a formulation that's similar to the experimental treatment, but it's really what we call a sugar pill. So it does not produce any biological effect. Double blind means the researcher does not know which group the patient is being or trial participant is allocated to, whether it's placebo or the treatment arm. And placebo-controlled means we use placebo as a control. Sometimes the placebo is actually an active medication. So it's not always a biologically inert substance. I thought also I would show you useful websites to find clinical trials, and probably the most useful website is clinicaltrials.gov. Also, the MDA website has a clinical trials tool that you can use to find clinical trials. You can see on the screen, it says find trials. If you click on that, it asks you about the condition, the age, the gender, your zip code or city. And at the end, it's going to give you a list of active trials that are ongoing based on your search criteria for that specific condition. And also we give you contact information, email and phone numbers that you can call and ask about participation. There are other websites that are typically belongs to organization or foundation or association that have a list of active trials for that specific disease. Parent project, PPMD for dystrophinopathies, myasthenia.org for myasthenia gravis, Curafay for Friedreich's ataxia, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to just give you an example of how to search for a trial on clinicaltrials.gov. And if you can see in the right lower part of the screen, there's a condition or disease, and I typed there congenital myotonic dystrophy. So I'm trying to look for trials that are related to congenital myotonic dystrophy. I put that in and I hit search. I get 6 studies that come back. Some of them are observational studies, and some of them are drug trials. Some of them are suspended. You see the under status completed or not yet recruiting. you can adjust your search based on is it rolling by invitation, or is it not yet recruiting, or is it recruiting only, or is it completed? And then you can also adjust the filter on the eligibility criteria, so you can filter the results. So for example, if you go into the number one trial in this one, which is not yet recruiting, you get this screen, and this screen, it tells you more information about the clinical trial. For example, this one, it's efficacy and safety of tidaeclusib in congenital myotonic dystrophy. It has the identifier for the clinical trial. It has the recruitment status. It has when it was first posted and when it was updated, who is sponsoring the trial, and then study description, and it tells you here it's a randomized, multi-center, double-blind, placebo-controlled, phase 2/3 study of patients 6 to 16 years of age diagnosed with congenital myotonic dystrophy. It also gives you the study design for the trial, the number of estimated number for participants. Here it's 56. And the estimated start date and the completion date. It gives you the arms for the trial, and it gives you eligibility criteria. And the eligibility criteria are important to look at, because if you don't satisfy them, you will not be eligible for this specific clinical trial. There are certain things sometimes you see that you may not have any idea about, and those are typically either functional assessments or things that are related to laboratory workup or to physical exam findings. So if you have questions about those, it's a great idea to look at the locations for the trial. And I'm just including here some of the locations. It gives you the locations, gives you contact numbers, gives you the name of the principal investigator for that specific site, and also emails. And you can definitely email the people on the contact form there for those specific sites to get more information. With that said, now hopefully you know how to navigate clinicaltrials.gov. The tool for locating clinical trials on different websites is quite similar. The MDA one is also similar. It may ask you more information about location and city and age and things like that. But there is also a skip button at the bottom that you can use to skip any information that you do not want to put in. So with that said, I'm going to switch gears and talk about some of the conditions that are common under the muscular dystrophy umbrella, and talk about hopefully advances and ongoing clinical trials in those conditions. The first one is spinal muscular atrophy. Spinal muscular atrophy is an autosomal recessive condition. It is characterized by progressive and irreversible loss of motor nerve cells that result in weakness and atrophy of muscles. We typically divide it into types. These are dependent on the number of copies of the survival motor neuron gene 2, and it goes from type 0 to type 4. What happened over the last year, there is of course the approval of Zolgen SMA for as a gene therapy for the treatment of spinal muscular atrophy in patients under 2 years of age at the time of treatment. And very recently, on August 7th, Genentech, they received the approval for Risdiplam for the treatment of SMA in patients older than 2 months. Now, Risdiplam is an oral medication as compared with nusinersen, which is given via a lumbar puncture, so it's an intrathecal injection. The Risdiplam actually is distributed both peripherally and centrally, so to the nervous system and also in peripheral tissues. It's a nice addition to the medications that we already have for patients with spinal muscular atrophy, because it's an oral medication. It avoids the hassle of course, arranging for a lumbar puncture and the possible complications that can happen by delivering the medication through a lumbar puncture. Just looking overall how this medication works. Now, in healthy subjects who do not have SMA, you have a functional SMN1 gene that produces fully functional protein, and SMN2 gene that produces, depending on the number of copies of SMN2, also a functional SMN protein, but in 70 to 90% of the time, the exon 7 is missing, and for that reason, the protein that's produced is not functional. In patients with SMA, you lose SMN1 and you have a varying number of copies of SMN2. So depending on the number of SMN2 copies of the SMN2, you will likely have some functional SMN protein. Restiplam, what it does, it helps incorporating exon 7 into the pre-messenger RNA of SMN2, and that produces a functional protein. It binds to two sites that are illustrated here, the splice site of intron 7 and the exonic splice enhancer. And that's how it produces its effect. Looking at ongoing trials, there is a study now of restiplam in infants with pre-symptomatic spinal muscular atrophy. Unfortunately, there are no sites in Ohio, but there are 3 sites in the US. This is a multinational study. It's trying to look at if restiplam also works for patients who are pre-symptomatic. Moving on to Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a problem with dystrophin. It's X-linked. So boys develop the muscle weakness in this disease that also affects heart muscle. Mothers of boys with the disease, they are typically carriers, but some of them have varying degrees of physical symptoms of the disease and are called manifesting carriers. On August 12th of this year, there was an FDA approval for Wiltolarsen from NS Pharma, and this is an exon 53 skipping therapy. We already have an exon 53 skipping therapy for patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy called Vyndys 53. This is from Sarepta Pharmaceuticals, and it was approved in 2019. But looking at the data of both trials, it looks like there is a larger increase in the amount of dystrophin in muscle tissue when you compare Viltepso or Wiltolarsen with Vyndys 53. You can see the change is 5.3% with Wiltolarsen. It's more robust than Vyndys 53. And this analysis is via Western blot of muscles. Probably it's a more potent therapy than Vyndys 53, and it is approved under an accelerated approval program from the FDA, which means there is going to be a trial looking at they have to prove clinical efficacy for this medication to gain full FDA approval. The same thing that's happening with Vyndys 53. Then I've tried to look at the list of trials that are ongoing in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and the list is quite lengthy. You can find a good list of this, the pipeline in the PPMD website. and it talks about several mechanisms by which Duchenne muscular dystrophy can be tackled. One of them is restoring or replacing dystrophin, and you can see here medications that have already gained approval and medications that are still in clinical trials. Then the second mechanism is combating fibrosis. The third one is reducing inflammation, and you can see a large number of medications in each group, regulating calcium balance, improving muscle growth and protection, restoring cell energy, and improving heart function. Cincinnati Children Hospital Medical Center is a Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy Center of Excellence, and they have several ongoing trials of Duchenne muscular dystrophy that I've included in my slides. These clinical trials are looking at different mechanisms that I have showed you earlier on the slides to treat Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Now, I've included them in my slides, and I will give you in the last slide the contact information for their research coordinator, including email and phone number, and you can call and inquire and hopefully participate in one of these trials. I showed you the list of ongoing, and this is the list of upcoming trials for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So a large number. I don't think I have the time to go over each of one of them and tell you exactly what it is going to test and what is the purpose of testing and what kind of medication they're going to use in that trial. So one of them here, the fibrogen, is pamrevlumab, which is an antifibrotic agent. It works hopefully by reducing fibrosis in muscles, and this is for patients with non-ambulatory Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which typically the trials in Duchenne muscular dystrophy are for ambulatory patients, but this one is for non-ambulatory patients. So it's a good trial to have, especially for those who are non-ambulatory. Moving on to myasthenia gravis. So myasthenia gravis is a chronic autoimmune neuromuscular junction disorder characterized by fluctuating weakness, fatigable weakness of voluntary muscles. It can be early onset or late onset in terms of age. It can be ocular, affecting only ocular muscles, or generalized, affecting the whole complement of skeletal muscles in the body. And it can be bulbar predominant, meaning affecting primarily muscles of chewing, swallowing, and talking. The myasthenia gravis can be seropositive with antibodies to acetylcholine receptor, muscle-specific kinase, or LRP4, lipoprotein related receptor protein 4, or seronegative. Sometimes we do not see any antibodies in patients with myasthenia gravis. What happened over the last year is argenx announced the results of their efgartigimod phase 3 trial, the ADAPT trial, in which they reported that the medication showed efficacy in the primary endpoint, which was myasthenia gravis ADL score when compared with the placebo, and then the secondary outcome, which is quantitative myasthenia gravis score in comparison with placebo again, and the efgartigimod was well tolerated and had a good safety profile. With that said, probably argenx will move on and gain FDA approval at some point, either close to the end of this year or next year, and will be one of the medications that are available for patients with myasthenia gravis, in addition to other only two approved, FDA-approved medications, which are pyridostigmine and eculizumab. There was also positive news from Momenta Pharmaceuticals. This is a phase 2 trial of nipocalimab in generalized myasthenia gravis. The trial met its primary endpoint, and typically the primary endpoint in myasthenia gravis trials is a patient-reported outcome, and the most commonly used one is the myasthenia gravis activity of daily living. So it showed benefit in that, and also was well tolerated and had no adverse events. The study was close to its end when COVID started, so it was stopped. Actually, there was a planned extension phase, an open label phase, but it was also stopped because of COVID-19. It's likely that this medicine will go through a phase 3 trial, of course, a larger number of patients to look again at the efficacy and the safety profile before it gets approved. The MuSK-MG phase 3 trial, so muscle-specific kinase MG trial from Catalyst Pharmaceuticals. This was using a medication that's already approved for the treatment of Lambert-Eaton myasthenic syndrome, amifampridine or Firdapse. Unfortunately, the trial missed its primary endpoint, so this medication actually did not show an improvement in myasthenia gravis activities of daily living, which means it will not be available for use in patients with myasthenia gravis. As you can see, most of this news is actually relatively recent. In the last week or two, everybody is announcing results of their trials. There are a large number of myasthenia gravis active clinical trials that are ongoing using different mechanisms of action. Most of these are phase 3 trials, but some of them are phase 1 and 2, just proof of concept trials. The zilucoplan is a C5 or complement inhibitor. Rozanolixizumab is an FcRn blocker. Descartes, this is a new way of hopefully treating myasthenia gravis, and this is a treatment that is used in actually cancer patients. It works on the B cell maturation antigen and blocks the formation of plasma cells and the production of antibodies. There are open label study of using eculizumab in pediatric patients. Phase 3 trial of using a medication similar to eculizumab, a C5 inhibitor called ravulizumab. This trial is ongoing at this time at University of Cincinnati. Another FcRn blocker, RVT1404, a phase 2A randomized trial. These are very easy to find trials on clinicaltrials.gov. If you are interested, you can go on that website and put the identifier for it, even NCT 038638080, and it will pop up. You'll be able to see the inclusion-exclusion criteria and the sites that are participating and the contact information. We have 3 upcoming trials for MG, myasthenia gravis, at the University of Cincinnati. One of them is the Takeda trial. It's using a monoclonal antibody directed against CD38. Another one is the MINT trial using ipilimumab. And ipilimumab is a monoclonal antibody against CD19. And then another one very early on, we are still working on starting the trial. It's using a combination therapy with monoclonal antibody against C5 and a small interfering RNA targeting C5. It's sponsored by Regeneron. Again, I'll give you the contact information for University of Cincinnati, and we'll be happy to discuss these with you further. Moving on to Pompe disease. Pompe disease is a rare autosomal recessive lysosomal storage disorder. It can be infantile, meaning affecting infants, or late onset, starting either in infancy without heart disease or after the first year of life. It is the defect in Pompe disease is a lysosomal acid alpha glucosidase. In June of this year, Sanofi announced positive results of their COMET phase 3 trial, in which they used avalglucosidase alpha, which is a neurodegeneration enzyme replacement therapy and compared it with the standard of care, the L-glucosidase alpha, and showed that patients who received, or trial participants who received eval glucosidase did better in terms of forced vital capacity in the 6-minute walk test. They will likely submit to the FDA in the second half of this year, and we will hear about FDA approval hopefully next year. So this is another medication that will come soon for patients with Pompe disease. There was another trial called PROPEL trial, and that trial has enrolled fully now, and it's in the extension phase. We do not have full data yet from that trial. It will probably be announced the first half of next year. And it's also using a newer generation enzyme replacement therapy along with an oral chaperone for helping with enzyme targeting to the skeletal muscle. So we'll hear more about this one hopefully next year. Now it's in the extension phase, but it's not enrolling. There are 3 phase 1-2 gene therapy trials in Pompe disease, and this is an interesting time. We will see how these evolve over time and whether they will proceed to phase 3 trial and show efficacy. Moving on to the myotrophic lateral sclerosis. So ALS is a progressive motor neuron disorder in which patients develop insidious weakness that typically start focally in a limb and then progress to other limbs and may involve respiratory muscles. It's a devastating disease affecting approximately 3 to 5 individuals per 100,000. It can be familial, so there is a genetic etiology for it, or it can be sporadic, means there is no family history of the disease. And even those who have sporadic disease, they may have an underlying genetic abnormality causing the disease. So it's estimated approximately 10% of patients who have ALS, they have familial form of the disease or genetic defect. Even though that there are a large number of genes that have been discovered to cause ALS, there hasn't been much emphasis on the treatment of genetic ALS. And this is actually the first trial addressing the treatment of genetic ALS. And this is patients who have superoxide dismutase 1 mutation that leads to toxic gain of function and development of ALS. So the trial was a phase 1-2 trial that was published in this year in July, showing that the antisense oligonucleotide tofersen reduces the concentration of superoxide dismutase 1 in the CSF. They have used different doses, and the highest dose, which is 100 milligram, produces the most effect, as you can see in the lowest curve, as compared to placebo, which is in blue. Right now, tofersen is being evaluated for its safety and efficacy in a phase 3 trial, and also a long-term extension after that phase 3. So this is good news for patients with genetic ALS, that there is some work that's happening in ALS in that aspect. The second very good news about ALS is the development of the Healy ALS Platform Trial. This started at Mass General Hospital, and it's basically a multi-center, multi-regime clinical trial evaluating the safety and efficacy of a number of investigational products together. So in a traditional clinical trial, we use one therapy and see whether it's effective or not. In the platform trial, you can use several therapies. And this, of course, saves time it allows more access to medications, and less patients will be randomized to the placebo group. So the placebo group is actually would be shared between the active arms, as you can see in this graph. This is now ongoing. 52 sites, I think, are enrolling in the US. Some of them have not started enrolling yet because they're still working on the regulatory paperwork. But the first 5 products that are going to be trialed include zilucoplan, verdiperstat, gold nanocrystals, pridopidine, and IC14. These medications, 2 of them are believed to have neuroprotective effect on the motor nerve cells, and the other 3 have immunologic effect, and hopefully tackle the immunologic issues that are seen in patients with ALS. Of course, once these 5 medications are studied, then another platform's trial can start for other products. So this is supposed to continue till a cure is found. I put in the link to find more information about this ALS platform trial, but it is an important development that hopefully accelerates drug development for patients with ALS. There are other trials that are ongoing. One of them we have at University of Cincinnati. It's again using ravulizumab, comparing it with placebo for patients with ALS. And there are 2 stem cell trials that are ongoing in patients with ALS. The one that I have on here is at the Mayo Clinic. The only sites are the 3 Mayo clinics around the country. With that, I will say that the future is bright for neuromuscular disorders under the muscular dystrophy umbrella. As you can see, there are many active and ongoing trials in neuromuscular disorders. The field is expanding exponentially, and hopefully we will see many more treatments coming to fruition on a yearly basis. If you have any questions or want to be considered for enrollment in a clinical trial, please contact the senior coordinator at University of Cincinnati. I put her contact information, or the coordinator, research coordinator at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center for enrollment at Cincinnati Children. I put also her email and phone number. If you're interested to know what is this picture coming from, it's a cover of a book. It's a book that's written by one of my spinal muscular atrophy patients. And I thought I would put it on there to show that patients with muscular dystrophy actually sometimes do things that us would not do, such as writing a book.
That's awesome. That's great. A couple questions. Have you noticed any decline in clinical trials accepting patients due to the whole COVID pandemic?
Okay, so to address that question, I believe handling of COVID-19 in research was totally different among sites in the US. I think overall, all sites in the US, at first, they shut down research. And I can tell you, there are still sites that are still shut down in terms of research. And by that, I mean they may have allowed already enrolled patients to continue participation in the trial that they have been participating in, with consideration for home visits or home treatments if that was allowed by the clinical trial. But there are sites like our site, we have already reopened, and the trials that we have now, we are actually fully enrolling into those trials. But at first, we were affected by COVID-19, and we could only continue the trials that we had, we could not enroll in new patients, and we had to consider the home option for some patients.
Okay. And when you are looking into getting into a clinical trial, do you need a doctor referral to get into a clinical trial, or is it simply just going to the website like you showed us?
You do not need a doctor referral to
Okay.
go into a clinical trial. In fact, one of my patients, not my patients, but trial participants, called actually our research coordinator from Minneapolis, Minnesota, to participate in one of our trials. It was interesting to me because he found our information on a website and he found the contact information. He called us. We arranged for him to travel, and we saw him, and he was enrolled into the trial. He already knows what his diagnosis is, and it did not require any physician referral.
Okay, good to know. Are there any current trials going on in myotonic?
So as far as I know, apart from the one that I put for the tidaeclusib, which is not yet recruiting according to clinicaltrials.gov,
Okay.
I am not aware of any other trials.
Okay. And another one just popped up. Is there any current trial for FSHD?
I also am not aware of any trials. However, there are plans by many pharmaceutical companies to conduct gene therapy trials and trials that involve medications that I may not even be aware of. So I am giving you a glimpse of what's happening right now, but the situation can change dramatically very quickly. And basically in a day, we may hear that the medication now is working for that specific condition, or it is not working, or it gained FDA approval. So keeping an eye on research updates. So for someone with myotonic dystrophy, I would recommend the website myotonic.org and the MDA website, which will have research updates on there. And if there is a clinical trial, even in the making, basically, people would know about it.
Okay. And with the new treatments for SMA and DMD that were just approved by FDA, how long could we expect to see that go until it gets on the market? Do you know what that lead time might be for those two drugs?
So for SMA, I can tell you I have prescribed the medication yesterday to one of my patients.
Wow, okay.
Meaning I filled the prescription form and I submitted it through the channels where it needs to go. But how long it's going to take for the patient to really receive the medication on hand, we will see how long it's going to take, because we still do not know much about, and I'm talking here about risdiplam, for example. I do not know what type of processes that's going to go in the background for the patient to receive the medicine, including insurance approval. We know that insurance companies, I'm not aware that there are policies out there defining which patients are going to be approved for this medication, because even though that it's FDA approved, insurance companies typically come up with specific policies detailing which patients are going to be approved for this medication. So we'll see. I can tell you, I prescribed the medicine, and
that's exciting.
Yeah, that's very exciting.
Very exciting. I do not see any more questions that have come in, so I want to thank you for your time, Dr. Kushlaf, and appreciate it on a Saturday. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to do it. Thank you.
Great. Have a great weekend.
Same to you.
All right. And our final presentation will be at the top of the hour, and we are going to hear from Dr. Daniel Graf on mental health considerations. So stay tuned. Thank you.